So for this video, I will be doing my spoiler-free review for Stephen King's newest release, Holly. And returning subscribers will probably be able to tell that I'm in a new location, and I'm actually visiting my fiance in Canada, so I'm not in front of my bookshelves. And this also affected pretty much how I would normally read a new Stephen King release. Normally, I would wake up like in the middle of the night and start listening to the audiobook, and then eventually when my hardback would come in, or if I would go pick it up, I would do immersion reading. But of course I'm in Canada, so I only have the audiobook, and I did not wake up in the middle of the night because I was tired. So I basically just started reading it like in the morning when I woke up, and normally I would finish it the day of. I was not able to do that this time around. I actually woke up this morning, it's Wednesday morning, the day after the release, and I had like about an hour left. I tried to finish it last night, but I couldn't quite get to it. But I finished it this morning, and you're going to get my fresh thoughts on Stephen King's newest book. And what did I think of it? I'll just jump right into my rating. I was kind of disappointed with it. I gave it 3 stars. Definitely not perfect. I wouldn't necessarily call this a bad book. And if you compare my rating to Stephen King's last book, Fairy Tale, I also gave that book 3 stars, but in a much different context. Fairy Tale got 3 stars because the first like 200 pages or so, 250 pages were excellent. Like 5-star quintessential Stephen King writing. And then like the last half of the book kind of shit the bed. I really did not like the last half of that book. With Holly, though, it's a bit different. Throughout the whole book, it was kind of meh for me. Like, it wasn't bad. I just never really got sucked into the story. It was good, but it didn't really grab my attention. And going into the book, I definitely had lowered expectations because Holly was never, like, I know Holly's a fan favorite for a lot of people, but she was never like a favorite for me. She was fine in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, and she was good in The Outsider. I did start to appreciate her character more when she got her own novella in If It Bleeds. That's probably my favorite, like, Holly story. But for this one, I was a bit skeptical about having a Holly full-length novel. And for the most part, I think I was right, because this book just didn't really do it for me that much. But like I said, it's not a bad book, but it definitely has more. I have a lot of grievances with this book. I have more negatives than positives when it comes to this book. So let's jump into it. And again, this is going to be spoiler free. I might have mild spoilers for The Outsider and If It Bleeds. So if you haven't read those, maybe skip this review after you've read those. But I'm not going to spoil anything for Holly. But yeah, Holly, like I said, had a lot of negatives for me. One of the main complaints right off the bat was there's just so much political stuff in this book. And Stephen King, you know, like his whole career, he's thrown in some political stuff here and there. But lately, a lot of Trump bashing. And I'm not going to get into political stuff, but still, just, I don't like that in my books. Like, there's Trump and Biden stuff, and then, of course, this whole book takes place during COVID in 2021, so there's just so much COVID talk, and, like, for me, I kind of like to read books to escape, and, of course, we all had to go through COVID, so reading a whole book about, like, going through COVID regulations and characters are just asking, like, oh, do you wear a mask? Like, what shot did you get? Are you fully vaxxed? It's kind of annoying. And it was throughout the whole book. So that kind of took me out of it a bit. Another main, not complaint necessarily, but something that took me out of the story was that this audiobook that I listened to actually had a new narrator. I think the woman who played Holly in the Mr. Mercedes TV show. And she did a fairly good job. Like, she's not a bad narrator at all. But it's weird because all of the rest of the Holly books were narrated by Will Patton, who has a very distinct way of narrating Holly. And, like I said, Holly was in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, Outsider, and If It Bleeds, all narrated by Will Patton. And then you get to Holly, and it's not narrated by Will Patton, it's narrated by this other narrator, who did a decent job, but she just changes a lot of stuff. And so it just didn't really feel like Holly, Like, I wonder if Will Patton had have narrated the story, would I have liked it more? So that's, again, she did a good job, but it's just different. But overall for this book, it is good. The writing was, on par with Stephen King writing. For me, it was mainly the story. And I'm not going to get into any specifics because this is non-spoilery. But basically, we get, like interchanging chapters. You get Holly's perspective, and then you get some other perspectives. And basically, once you get through a good chunk of the book, you already know where the story is going. Very predictable. And once you figure out what's going to happen, you know how it's going to end, or at least I was able to pretty much know how the story was going to go beat for beat. And normally with Stephen King, well, I shouldn't say normally, but a lot of the times, my favorite books of his, the story kind of changes halfway through. Like with Billy Summers, I know some people didn't like that, where basically the first half of the book is kind of like the main summary of the back. Like that's the story you're going to get, but then it kind of switches halfway through. And then after that, you have no idea what's going to happen. But for this book, you pretty much know what's going to happen. So I was kind of just waiting for it, and it did happen. But yeah, the story itself just wasn't very compelling to me, which was pretty disappointing. But like I've said, it's not a bad book, but definitely not one of his best. And this is where I'll get into slight spoilers for The Outsider and If It Bleeds. So if you don't want to be spoiled for anything, you can kind of skip this part of the video. I'll have little spoiler tags here. But I think another reason why I didn't like Holly nearly as much as those two stories is because this book had much lower stakes. Like, I mean, there's stakes for... It's kind of hard to explain without fully spoiling, but essentially The Outsider and If It Bleeds have supernatural elements, which kind of raise the stakes. And this book definitely lowers those stakes because it's not supernatural at all. It's basically just these villains in this story are just real people doing terrible things, which is fun to read about. But it's just weird going from like hardcore supernatural stuff, like almost end of the world kind of stuff, to, just this small pocket of evil stuff that's happening. So, yeah, and it's also kind of weird because, yeah, Holly's had a very weird journey because, Mr. Mercedes, that trilogy starts off just typical thriller detective stuff, and then all of a sudden it gets supernatural, and then in The Outsider and If It Bleeds get really supernatural, and then all of a sudden in Holly, that kind of just all goes away. So very, very interesting decisions made by Stephen King writing Holly's journey here. But like I've said, not a bad book, just I was disappointed. I'm glad I lowered my expectations because if I would have got really excited for this and read this, I might have even given it a lower rating. But, it's not bad. It's just not what I wanted, I guess. I'm very curious to see what other people think of this book. It might be divisive. I know a lot of people on BookTube especially kind of agreed with me on Fairy Tale, because when I put out that review and I gave it 3 stars, I was like, ooh, people going to be mad at me, but pretty much everyone agreed that the first half of that book was much better than the second half. I'm very curious to see what people think of Holly. Are people going to love it? Are people going to hate it? I think people are going to have problems with all of the political and COVID stuff throughout this book. But if that stuff doesn't bother you, maybe you'll like it more. And if you love the character of Holly, you'll probably enjoy this book. Like I said, she's not one of my favorites. She's fine. I don't think a full novel was necessary for her. Probably my favorite story, like I really like If It Bleeds, and then The Outsider was pretty good with her in it. So yeah, Holly is definitely not one of my favorite books. I gave it 3 stars, and if you've read it or if you're interested in reading it, comment down below if you're going to read it, and if you have read it, please let me know what you thought of it. Do you agree with my review and think it's kind of meh? Or do you disagree with me and think that it's a 5-star new masterpiece? Whatever you think, comment down below. I'd love to chat with you about it. And it's always fun reading new Stephen King, even if it's not as good as I'd like it to be. But yeah, that's about it for my non-spoilery review. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a full spoiler review, because there's not too much to talk about anyway. I think I've gotten all of my thoughts out, so that's it. I'm not used to doing this kind of style of review either. Usually I'm more meticulous with my editing. But yeah, that's it. I gave Holly 3 stars. What did you guys think? Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I do tons of Stephen King stuff on the channel. You can go check out my older videos if you want. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.